They called her the Ice Princess of New York, Seraphina Blackwood, the heiress to a billion-dollar real estate empire who never spoke a word. The tabloids said she was arrogant. The board members called her broken. At the most important gala of the year, surrounded by 500 people desperate for her father's money, she was completely invisible, until a struggling single dad, wearing a cheap suit and carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, did the one thing nobody else bothered to do. He didn't shout, he didn't stare. He lifted his hands and signed two simple words. What happened next didn't just silence the room, it toppled an empire. This is the story of how a silent language spoke louder than money. The chandeliers inside the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel didn't sparkle. They glared. For Jack Hawthorne, the light felt like an interrogation lamp. He tugged at the collar of his tuxedo, a rental that was tight in the shoulders and loose in the waist, and checked his watch for the 10th time. He shouldn't be here. He was a small-time residential architect from Queens, with a bank account hovering in the low triple digits and a 6-year-old daughter, Molly, waiting for him at his sister's house. But the invite had been a clerical error, a golden ticket sent to his late father, and Jack was desperate. Hawthorne and Son was 2 weeks away from bankruptcy. He needed one face-to-face with Arthur Blackwood, the CEO of Blackwood Summit, to pitch the renovation project for the old Brooklyn Navy Yard. Just one conversation, Jack muttered to himself, grabbing a glass of sparkling water to keep his hands busy. Don't spill anything. Don't look poor. The room was a shark tank of Manhattan's elite, men with veneers brighter than Jack's future, and women draped in silk that cost more than his car. In the center of it all stood Arthur Blackwood. The man looked like he was carved out of granite. Silver hair, cold eyes, and a laugh that didn't reach his face. He was holding court, surrounded by sycophants. But Jack's eyes drifted past the titan of industry. Standing about 10 feet away from Arthur, near a towering display of ice sculptures, was a woman who looked like she wanted to dissolve into the floor. She was stunning, wearing a deep navy gown that contrasted with her pale skin and dark hair, but her posture was defensive. Her shoulders were hunched, her eyes fixed on the floor. 3 young socialites stood right next to her, laughing raucously, their champagne flutes clinking. They were talking over her, literally leaning across her personal space to gossip, treating her like a piece of furniture. "Is that the daughter?" one man whispered near Jack. "Seraphina," his companion sneered. "Tragic thing. Deaf as a post. Arthur drags her to these things for the optics, but she's useless. Doesn't lip read well. Doesn't speak. Just stands there looking miserable. Does she understand anything? Who knows? She's basically a doll." Jack felt a flash of irritation. He watched as a waiter offered her a tray of hors d'oeuvres. She didn't react because her back was turned. The waiter rolled his eyes, exaggerated a sigh, and walked away. Then a man Jack recognized, Grant Whitaker, Blackwood's vice president and rumored successor, approached her. Grant was handsome in a slimy, polished way. He grabbed Seraphina's arm to get her attention. She flinched, pulling back violently. Grant laughed, mocking her jumpiness, and said something loudly to the group, pointing at her ears. The group erupted in laughter. Seraphina's face turned crimson. She looked trapped, her eyes darting around the room, looking for an exit that didn't exist. Jack thought of his own brother, Liam. Liam had lost his hearing at 10 due to meningitis. Jack had spent his teenage years learning American Sign Language, ASL, so Liam would never feel left out at the dinner table. He knew that look on Seraphina's face. It wasn't stupidity. It was isolation. It was the look of someone screaming inside a glass box. Forget the pitch. Forget Arthur Blackwood. Jack set his water down. He adjusted his cheap lapels and walked straight through the crowd. He bypassed the circle of elites, ignored Grant Whitaker, and stepped directly into Seraphina's line of sight. He didn't smile aggressively. He just caught her eye. She looked at him with guarded fear, expecting another grab or a mocking shout. Jack raised his hands. "Boring party, isn't it?" he signed, his movements fluid and casual. Serafina froze. Her champagne glass tilted dangerously in her hand. Her eyes widened, shifting from his hands to his face. For a second, she looked like she might cry. Then, slowly, shakily, she handed her glass to a passing waiter. She raised her own slender hands. "I hate it," she signed back. "My shoes are killing me, and that man in the grey suit smells like cheap gin." Jack laughed out loud, a genuine, deep belly laugh that cut through the drone of the gala. "I'm Jack," he signed. "My suit is a rental, and I'm pretty sure I'm the poorest guy in this room." Serafina's lips quirked upward. It was a small movement, but it transformed her face. The ice melted. "I'm Serafina, and you're the first person in 3 hours who hasn't treated me like a lamp. Well, you're a very well-dressed lamp," Jack signed. She covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking with silent laughter. It was a radiant, genuine reaction. Suddenly the air in the room shifted. The ambient chatter died down. Jack realized that Arthur Blackwood had stopped talking. The CEO was staring at them. Grant Whitaker looked furious. "Who the hell is that?" Arthur's voice boomed. Serafina didn't hear him, but she saw Jack's gaze shift. She looked at her father. Usually she would shrink away, but she was still buzzing from the joke. She looked at Arthur, then back at Jack, and for the first time that night, she stood up straight. "My father looks angry," she signed to Jack. "He hates when I make scenes." "We're just talking," Jack signed back. "If that's a scene, let's make it a blockbuster." Arthur Blackwood marched over, his heavy footsteps parting the crowd. "You!" he barked at Jack. "Who are you? And why are you bothering my daughter?" Jack didn't back down. He spoke aloud while signing simultaneously, so Serafina was included in the conversation, a courtesy no one else had extended to her all night. "I'm not bothering her, Mr. Blackwood. I was telling her that your ice sculpture is melting." Arthur blinked, caught off guard. He looked at Serafina. She was looking at Jack with an expression Arthur hadn't seen in years. Interest. She understands you?" Arthur stammered. "She's deaf, sir, not invisible," Jack said, his voice calm but hard. "And she has a great sense of humor about Grant's cologne." Serafina smirked. Arthur looked between the two of them, the gears turning in his head. The ruthlessness in his eyes dimmed for a split second, replaced by curiosity. "You know sign language," Arthur stated. "Fluent," Jack said. "And who are you?" "Jack Hawthorne. Hawthorne and Son Architecture." Arthur raised an eyebrow. "The Queen's firm. You're the one who's been emailing my secretary 3 times a day for a month." Jack felt the heat rise in his neck. "Persistence is a virtue, right?" Grant Whitaker slid up beside Arthur, sneering. "Security can escort him out, Arthur. Obviously a gatecrasher harassing Serafina for leverage." Arthur looked at Grant, then at Serafina. She stepped forward, placing a hand on Jack's forearm, a shocking breach of protocol for the untouchable heiress. She looked her father dead in the eye and signed furiously. Arthur looked at Jack. "What did she say?" Jack cleared his throat. She said if you kick me out, she's leaving with me because I'm the only one here with a brain." A hush fell over the circle. Grant looked ready to explode. Arthur Blackwood stared at Jack for a long, agonizing 10 seconds. Then a slow, terrifying grin spread across his face. "Hawthorne," Arthur grunted, "be at my office Monday, 8 a.m. Don't be late." The following Monday, Jack didn't feel like a winner. He felt like a man walking to the gallows. He had spent the weekend panicking, prepping his portfolio, and explaining to his 6-year-old Molly why Daddy was wearing his serious tie. "Are you going to build a castle, Daddy?" Molly had asked, shoving a half-eaten piece of toast into his mouth. "Ideally, sweetie, or at least fix a bathroom," Jack had replied, kissing her forehead before dropping her at school. When he arrived at Blackwood/Summit Tower in Midtown, the atmosphere was sterile and hostile. The receptionist didn't look up, but when he gave his name, her head snapped up. "Mr. Hawthorne, Mr. Blackwood is expecting you. Top floor." The elevator ride made his ears pop. When the doors opened, he wasn't greeted by Arthur, but by Grant Whitaker. Grant was leaning against a mahogany wall, checking his cuticles. "Let's get one thing clear, construction worker," Grant spat, not bothering with a greeting. "Arthur is sentimental about his daughter. That's the only reason you're here. You're a charity case. A pet." "Good morning to you too, Grant," Jack said, tightening his grip on his portfolio. "Is the coffee fresh?" Grant stepped into his path. "You'll get a small consulting fee. You'll interpret for Serafina when needed. And you will stay away from the actual business. Do we understand each other?" "Grant!" The voice was sharp. They both turned. Serafina was standing at the end of the hallway. She wasn't in a ball gown now. She wore a sharp, cream-colored power suit, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She looked like a CEO, not a daughter. She walked towards them briskly. She didn't sign. She pulled a notepad from her pocket, scribbled something, and ripped the page out, slapping it against Grant's chest. Grant looked at the note, his face flushing purple. He crumpled it and stormed off without a word. Jack looked at Serafina. "What did you write?" he signed. Serafina smiled, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "I told him his tie doesn't match his arrogance." Jack chuckled. "I'm here to see your father." "I know," she signed, "but he's not the one hiring you. I am." Jack paused. "You?" She motioned for him to follow her. Instead of the main boardroom, she led him into a side office. It was chaotic. Blueprints were scattered everywhere. Architectural models made of balsa wood covered every surface. It looked like the inside of Jack's brain. Serafina walked to a large drafting table covered in a sheet. She pulled the sheet away. Underneath was a model of the Brooklyn Navy Yard project, the one Jack wanted to pitch. But it wasn't the sterile, glass box design Blackwood Summit had been teasing in the press. It was organic. It featured sensory gardens, acoustic-friendly spaces, and curved lines that mimicked sound waves. It was brilliant. It was genius. "Did you design this?" Jack asked, stunned. Serafina nodded, her expression vulnerable. "My father doesn't know. He thinks I just dabble in art. He has Grant leading the design team. Grant's design is cold. It's a prison. This is incredible, Serafina. Why don't you show him?" "He doesn't listen," she signed, her movements becoming sharp and angry. "He sees a deaf girl. He sees a liability. He keeps me on the payroll as a consultant to make the company look inclusive, but I have no voice. Grant steals my ideas, waters them down, and sells them as his own." She looked at Jack, her eyes pleading. "I need a voice, Jack. I need an architect who understands structure, codes, and the grunt work, to partner with me. I design it, you build it, we pitch it together, but we have to do it in secret until it's undeniable." Jack looked at the model, then at the desperate woman standing in front of him. This was dangerous. Crossing Grant Whitaker was career suicide. Going behind Arthur Blackwood's back was lunacy. But then he thought of Molly. He thought of his empty bank account. And he thought of the way Serafina had looked at the party, isolated in a room full of people. "If we get caught," Jack signed, "Grant will bury me in concrete." Serafina stepped closer. "If we win, you'll be the lead architect on the biggest project in New York, and I'll finally be free." Jack sighed, unbuttoned his jacket, and rolled up his sleeves. He walked over to the drafting table and picked up a pencil. "The load-bearing wall on the north side is weak," Jack signed, pointing to the model. "We need to reinforce it with steel beams if you want that cantilevered balcony." Serafina beamed. It was the first time someone had critiqued her work instead of dismissing it. "So," she signed, "partner?" Jack extended his hand. She took it. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Partner," Jack said aloud. Just then, the door swung open. Arthur Blackwood stood there, looking suspicious. "What are you two doing in here?" Jack's heart hammered against his ribs. He looked at Serafina. She froze. "Just getting to know the client, sir," Jack lied smoothly, stepping away from the model and subtly blocking Arthur's view of the intricate details. "Serafina was showing me where the coffee machine is. We were just heading to your office." Arthur narrowed his eyes. "Good, because the board is waiting. And Hawthorne, this meeting determines if your company survives the month. Don't disappoint me." As Arthur turned to leave, Serafina quickly signed to Jack behind her father's back. "Game on." The next 3 weeks were a blur of caffeine, deception, and the strangest duality Jack Hawthorne had ever experienced. By day, Jack was the office grunt. Grant Whitaker took immense pleasure in diminishing him. He gave Jack a cubicle in the basement, next to the server room, where the hum of the cooling fans was loud enough to induce a migraine. Grant piled him with menial tasks, checking zoning codes for strip malls in New Jersey, redlining typos in contracts, and, on one particularly humiliating Tuesday, fetching Grant's dry cleaning. "It keeps you humble, Hawthorne," Grant had sneered, dropping a suit bag on Jack's desk. "We can't have you thinking you're actually part of the team, just because Serafina took a shine to you. She likes stray dogs." Jack bit his tongue until he tasted copper. He needed the paycheck. But more importantly, he needed the access card. Because by night, Jack Hawthorne was building a legacy. Every evening at 6 p.m., after the main staff had cleared out and the janitorial crew began their rounds, Jack would take the service elevator up to the top floor. He would slip into Serafina's private studio, a room officially designated as Storage B on the building schematics to avoid Grant's prying eyes. It was here that the magic happened. The dynamic between Jack and Serafina was electric, fueled by the silence of the room and the flurry of their hands. They developed a rhythm. Serafina was the visionary. She saw shapes and flows that defied traditional logic. She wanted the Navy Yard project, which they had codenamed Project Vox, to be a visual symphony. She sketched sweeping glass curves that captured the light off the East River, turning the building into a lighthouse of sorts. Jack was the anchor. He took her ethereal concepts and gave them bones. He calculated the load bearings, figured out the HVAC integration, and ensured her glass curves wouldn't shatter under the high winds of a New York winter. One rainy Thursday night, the tension in the room shifted from professional to personal. They were huddled over a massive schematic. Jack was exhausted. He rubbed his temples, his eyes blurring. "You look terrible," Serafina signed across the table. She slid a cup of tea toward him. It was Earl Grey, exactly how he liked it. He hadn't told her that. She had just noticed. "Thanks," Jack signed back, smiling wearily. "My daughter, Molly, has a fever. I was up half the night reading her stories." Serafina paused, her pencil hovering over the paper. "Your wife doesn't help with the night shifts?" Jack froze. He hadn't talked about this. He took a sip of the tea, the warmth doing little to settle the sudden cold in his chest. "My wife, Sarah, died 3 years ago," Jack signed slowly. "Car accident. It's just me and Molly. That's why I need this job. That's why I take Grant's abuse. I need to make sure she has a future." Serafina's expression softened into something profoundly sad. She walked around the table and stood next to him. She didn't touch him, but her presence was a comfort. "I'm sorry," she signed. "I know what it's like to lose the person who translates the world for you. My mother died when I was 7. She was the only one who bothered to learn sign language properly. After she passed, the house went silent. My father, he hired tutors, but he never learned. He just stopped trying." Jack looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the loneliness that sat on her shoulders like a heavy coat. "He loves you," Jack signed, though he wasn't entirely sure. "He's just afraid of what he doesn't understand." "He's ashamed," Serafina corrected, her signs sharp and fast. "He wanted a dynasty. He got a silent daughter. That's why he loves Grant. Grant is the son he wanted. Loud, aggressive, perfect. Grant is a shark in a tailored suit," Jack signed. And his design for the Navy Yard is soulless. When your father sees Project Vox, he won't see a silent daughter. He'll see a genius." Serafina smiled, a blush creeping up her neck. "We have to finish it first." The emotional intimacy of that night was shattered 2 days later by a logistical nightmare. It was Saturday. Jack was supposed to come in for an emergency session. They had 48 hours to finalize the rendering before the preliminary internal review. But his babysitter cancelled at the last minute. Panic set in. He couldn't cancel on Serafina. She was counting on him. He took a risk. When Jack walked into the Blackwood building lobby, he was holding a small hand. Molly, wearing her favorite dinosaur raincoat and clutching a battered sketchbook, looked around the marble lobby with wide eyes. "Is this the castle, Daddy?" she whispered. "It's an office, Moll. Remember the rules. Don't touch, don't run." "Be a ninja," Molly recited solemnly. Jack smuggled her up to the studio. He expected Serafina to be annoyed. This was a place of work, a secret war room. When the door opened, Serafina looked up from her drafting table. Her eyes went to Jack, then down to the small girl clinging to his leg. Jack started to sign an apology. "I'm so sorry. The sitter." Serafina dropped her pencil. Her face lit up with a brightness Jack had never seen. She knelt down instantly, ignoring her expensive slacks on the dusty floor, bringing herself to Molly's eye level. She waved her hand. "Hello," she signed, then pointed to herself. "Serafina." Molly looked at Jack. "Daddy, is she a ninja too?" "She's the boss ninja," Jack smiled. "She speaks with her hands, like Uncle Liam used to." Molly's eyes widened. She tapped her chest. "Molly," she said. Serafina watched Jack, waiting for the translation. Jack signed. "She says her name is Molly." Serafina smiled and gently took Molly's hand, forming her fingers into the letter M. Then she tapped the M against Molly's temple. "Molly," she signed. Molly giggled and repeated the gesture. For the next 4 hours, the studio was transformed. Jack worked on the structural elevation, but he kept getting distracted by the scene in the corner. Serafina had set Molly up with a spare drafting board. They were drawing together. There was no sound, just the scratching of pencils and occasional silent laughter. Serafina was teaching Molly signs for dinosaur, skyscraper, and cookie. It was the domesticity of it that terrified Jack. It felt too right. It felt like a family. Around 2 p.m., the door opened without warning. Jack's heart stopped. He spun around, shielding the Project Vox model with his body. It wasn't Grant. It was Arthur Blackwood. The CEO stood in the doorway, freezing in place. He looked at Jack, who was sweating through his shirt. He looked at the unauthorized child in his secret storage room. And then he looked at his daughter. Serafina was sitting on the floor, covered in graphite dust, holding a drawing Molly had made of a purple dinosaur eating a building. She was laughing, a silent, shaking laugh that made her eyes crinkle. Arthur stared. He hadn't seen Serafina look like that in 20 years. "Mr. Blackwood," Jack stammered, stepping forward. "I can explain. The babysitter cancelled, and I didn't want to miss the work session, so—" Arthur held up a hand to silence him. He walked into the room. He didn't look at the secret model Jack was hiding. He walked straight to Serafina and Molly. Serafina looked up, fear flashing in her eyes when she saw her father. She instinctively pulled Molly closer. Arthur looked at the drawing in Serafina's hand. He looked at the little girl. Does she know?" Arthur asked Jack, his voice unusually quiet. "Know what, sir?" "Does the child know Serafina is deaf?" "Yes," Jack said. "They've been communicating all afternoon. Molly thinks Serafina is a wizard." Arthur swallowed hard. He looked at his daughter, really looked at her, not as an asset or a liability, but as a woman who was currently communicating effortlessly with a 6-year-old stranger. "I see," Arthur said. His voice was gruff, masking something else. He turned to Jack. Don't make a habit of running a daycare in my building, Hawthorne. No, sir. And Hawthorne? Yes? Whatever you two are working on under those sheets. Arthur gestured vaguely to the covered models. It better be good. Grant is presenting his final proposal on Friday. You have until then. He turned and walked out. Jack and Serafina exchanged a stunned look. He knew. He didn't know what they were doing, but he knew they were up to something, and he hadn't stopped them. We have 5 days, Serafina signed, her hands trembling slightly. Then let's make them count, Jack replied. The week leading up to the Friday presentation was a descent into madness. Jack and Serafina practically lived in the studio. They ate takeout on the floor, slept in 20-minute bursts on a leather couch in the corner, and poured their souls into Project Vox. The design was revolutionary. It wasn't just a building, it was an ecosystem. Serafina had incorporated a central atrium that utilized natural acoustics to dampen the city noise, creating a sanctuary of silence in the middle of Brooklyn. It was a physical manifestation of her world, inviting the hearing world to experience peace. It was beautiful, sustainable, and cheaper to build than Grant's glass monstrosity. By Thursday night, it was done. The 3D renderings were rendered. The physical model was polished. The cost analysis spreadsheets were balanced to the penny. It's perfect, Jack whispered, staring at the holographic display on the screen. Serafina stood beside him, resting her head on his shoulder for just a moment before pulling away. It's us, she signed. I'll save everything to the encrypted drive, Jack said. We keep the physical model here, locked. I'll take the drive home. We present tomorrow at 10 a.m. He initiated the transfer to his secure USB drive. He watched the progress bar. 99%. 100%. He pulled the drive out, put it in his pocket, and smiled at Serafina. Get some sleep. You have to look like a queen tomorrow. She squeezed his hand. Thank you, Jack. For everything. Jack went home, kissed a sleeping Molly, and collapsed into bed. He slept the sleep of the righteous. He woke up to the sound of pounding on his door. It was 7 a.m. Jack stumbled to the door, confused. When he opened it, 2 large men in dark suits were standing there. Blackwood Security. Jack Hawthorne, one of them said. Yeah? Mister, Blackwood wants to see you. Now. Jack's stomach dropped. I'm supposed to be there at 9 for prep. Now, Mr. Hawthorne. The ride to the tower was silent and terrifying. When Jack was shoved into the boardroom, it wasn't the pitch meeting he expected. The room was empty except for Arthur Blackwood, who was staring out the window, and Grant Whitaker, who was sitting at the head of the table with a laptop open. Serafina was there too, standing in the corner, looking pale and confused. Sir? Jack said, stepping in. What's going on? Arthur turned around. His face was a mask of cold fury. He threw a stack of papers onto the table. I took a chance on you, Hawthorne. Against my better judgment, I let you into my company. I let you near my daughter. I don't understand, Jack said, looking at Serafina. She looked terrified. She signed, I don't know what's happening. Tell him, Grant, Arthur commanded. Grant smirked, a predatory, satisfied expression. He turned the laptop around. Last night, at 2 a.m., an email was sent from your workstation account, Grant said smoothly. It contained the proprietary structural data for the Navy Yard project. It was sent to Summit & Co., our biggest rival. Jack felt the blood drain from his face. That's impossible. I was home at 2 a.m. I was asleep. The logs don't lie, Grant said, and we found this in your desk. Grant held up a bank slip. It showed a deposit of $50,000 into an offshore account. It was obviously forged, clumsy even, but to a man like Arthur Blackwood, who was already suspicious of a poor architect, it looked damning. I didn't do this, Jack said, his voice rising. This is a setup. Grant is lying. We've been working on a counter-proposal because Grant's design is garbage. A counter-proposal? Grant laughed. Is that what you call it? Or were you just using Serafina to get access to the files so you could sell them? Arthur slammed his hand on the table. Enough! He looked at Jack with pure disgust. You used her. That's the worst part. You saw a vulnerable woman and you manipulated her to steal from me. I didn't use her, Jack shouted. She's the genius behind the new design. She's the one who— Stop lying, Arthur roared. Serafina is not an architect, Hawthorne. She's my daughter, and she has struggles you can't imagine. But she is not capable of this. He pointed to the stolen data. Jack looked at Serafina. Tell him, he signed frantically. Tell him about Project Vox. Tell him we did the work. Serafina stepped forward, her hands shaking violently. She started to sign. Father, Jack is telling the TR. Grant stood up and moved between them, effectively blocking Serafina's line of sight to her father. She's distraught, Arthur. Look at her. He's got her so confused she doesn't know what she's saying. He's been gaslighting her for weeks. Arthur couldn't read her signs. He only saw her distress. He saw Grant, his trusted lieutenant, protecting her. Get him out of here, Arthur whispered. No! Jack lunged forward. Arthur, look at the drive in my pocket. Look at the files. Security grabbed Jack. They pinned his arms behind his back. If I ever see you near my company or my daughter again, Arthur hissed, leaning into Jack's face, I will make sure you never work in this country again. I will bury you so deep, not even your daughter will find you. The mention of Molly broke Jack. He stopped struggling. He couldn't risk Arthur coming after his family. Jack looked at Serafina one last time. She was crying, silent tears streaming down her face, her hands frozen in midair, silenced by the men in the room who refused to look at her. I'm sorry, Serafina, Jack said. The guards dragged him out. He was thrown onto the sidewalk of Fifth Avenue like a bag of trash. It began to rain. Jack stood there for a long time, staring up at the glass tower. He had lost. He had lost the job, his reputation was ruined, and he had left Serafina alone in the shark tank. He took the subway back to Queens. He picked up Molly from school early. He held her tight, so tight she squirmed. Daddy, you're wet, she said. I know, baby. I know. That night, Jack sat in his small, dark apartment. The eviction notice was on the table. He hadn't been paid for the month yet, and now he never would be. He held the USB drive in his hand, the evidence of their genius, useless now. He was about to throw it across the room when there was a knock at the door. It was frantic, heavy. Jack frowned. He walked to the door and looked through the peephole. He saw nothing but darkness. He opened the door on the chain. Standing in the hallway, dripping wet, shivering, and wearing a trench coat over her pajamas, was Serafina. She looked wild. Her hair was plastered to her face. She was breathing hard, as if she had run all the way from Manhattan. Jack undid the chain and threw the door open. Serafina, how did you— She pushed past him into the apartment. She spun around, her eyes blazing with a fire that terrified him. She didn't sign hello. She didn't sign I'm sorry. She raised her hands, water dripping from her fingertips, and signed one emphatic sentence. We are going to burn them to the ground. Jack stared at the woman standing in his hallway. The heiress to the Blackwood Empire was shivering in a soaking wet trench coat, her bare feet tucked into expensive loafers that were now ruined by the gritty Queen's slush. He ushered her in quickly, locking the door and sliding the chain back into place. Serafina, you can't be here. If your father finds out I'm harboring you, he won't just sue me. He'll send the police. Serafina didn't look frightened anymore. She looked galvanized. She shrugged off the wet coat, revealing silk pajamas underneath. She looked around the small, cramped apartment. The peeling wallpaper, the stack of unpaid bills on the counter, the smell of old coffee and radiator dust. It was a universe away from the penthouse on Fifth Avenue, but she didn't flinch. She turned to Jack and signed rapidly, her movements sharp with adrenaline. I ran away. They locked me in my room like a child. Grant told my father I was having a breakdown and needed to be sedated. I climbed out the bathroom window and down the fire escape. Jack's jaw dropped. You climbed down 4 stories in the rain? I'd climb down 100 to stop them, she she signed. "Grant isn't just stealing our work, Jack. He's destroying the company. I found these." She reached into the deep pocket of her pajama pants and pulled out a crumpled, damp flash drive. It wasn't the one Jack had used. This was a silver, heavy-duty drive with the initials GW engraved on it. "I swiped it from his desk while he was yelling at you," she explained. "I don't know the password, but I know Grant. He keeps records of everything. If he framed you, the proof is on here." Jack took the drive, his hand trembling. This was the smoking gun, but it was encrypted. Without the password, it was just a piece of metal. "Daddy?" A sleepy voice drifted from the bedroom doorway. Molly stood there, rubbing her eyes, clutching her stuffed dinosaur. She looked at the soaking wet woman in the middle of the living room. "Ninja lady," Molly whispered, her eyes widening. Serafina's fierce expression melted instantly. She dropped to her knees, ignoring the dampness of her clothes, and opened her arms. Molly ran into them. The embrace was tight, desperate. It was the hug of two people who had found safety in a storm. Jack watched them, a lump forming in his throat. He realized then that he couldn't send her back. He couldn't give up, not for himself, but for them. "Okay," Jack said aloud, running a hand through his hair. "Okay, if we're going to burn them to the ground, we need a match." He went to the kitchen and started a pot of coffee. It was going to be a long night. While Serafina changed into a pair of Jack's sweatpants and an oversized hoodie, swimming in the fabric but looking more comfortable than she ever had in a ball gown, Jack booted up his ancient laptop. "The presentation is tomorrow at noon," Jack signed as they huddled around the small kitchen table. "The media showcase at the Pierre Hotel, same place we met. All the major networks will be there. Grant is unveiling the Navy Yard design live." Serafina nodded, her face grim. "We can't get in. Security will have our photos. We're blacklisted." "We don't need to get in the front door," Jack grinned, a reckless energy taking over. "I designed the renovation for the Pierre's service tunnels 5 years ago. They never updated the keycard codes for the freight elevators because it was too expensive." He pulled up a blueprint on his screen. "Well, we go in through the kitchen loading dock. We hack into the AV system from the server room behind the stage. When Grant starts his speech, we cut his feed and broadcast Project Vox." Serafina's eyes sparkled. "A coup." "Exactly. But we need to decrypt Grant's drive first. If we interrupt the broadcast without proof of his fraud, we're just disgruntled ex-employees. We need to destroy his credibility instantly." They stared at the silver flash drive. "Try money," Serafina suggested. Jack typed it in. "Access denied." "Try Blackwood," Jack signed. "Access denied." They spent 2 hours guessing. Birthdays, addresses, stock tickers. Nothing worked. The drive had a security feature. 3 more wrong guesses, and it would wipe itself clean. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Molly was asleep on the couch nearby. Rain lashed against the window pane. Jack put his head in his hands. "It's hopeless. We don't know how his mind works." "No." Serafina stared at the drive, her brow furrowed. She thought about Grant. She thought about the way he looked at her father, the way he looked at himself in the mirror. He was a narcissist. He didn't love money or power as much as he loved winning. Suddenly, Serafina tapped Jack's arm. "Try Serafina," she signed slowly. Jack looked at her. "Why would he use your name? He hates you." "He doesn't hate me," she signed, her face twisting in disgust. "He thinks he owns me. He told me once that I was his ticket to the throne. To him, I'm the key." Jack hesitated. "If this is wrong, we lose the drive. We lose the evidence." Serafina nodded. "Do it." Jack's finger hovered over the keyboard. He typed SERAPHINA. He hit enter. The screen froze for a second. Then a green bar appeared. Access granted. Jack let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for a week. He clicked open the folders. It was all there. The embezzlement scheme. The emails to Summit & Co. selling proprietary data. And a folder titled The Frame-Up, containing the forged logs he had planted on Jack's computer. "We got him," Jack whispered. Serafina didn't smile. She stared at the screen, seeing the calculated cruelty of the man her father trusted implicitly. "Now," she signed, her movements sharp and final. "Let's go build a future." They didn't sleep. Jack spent the night rendering the final presentation of Project Vox, syncing it with the evidence files. Serafina sat with Molly, who had woken up, and they prepared protest signs, not for the street, but for the soul. Serafina wrote a speech. She wrote it on note cards, her handwriting elegant and furious. At 10 a.m., Jack put on his only remaining suit, the one he'd worn to his wife's funeral. Serafina smoothed the lapels. She was wearing a simple black dress belonging to Jack's sister, who had dropped it off earlier that morning after a frantic phone call. It was cheap polyester, but on Serafina it looked like couture. Jack looked at her. "Are you ready to speak?" Serafina took a deep breath. She raised her hands. "I have been silent for 26 years. Today I scream." The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was packed to the rafters. Camera crews from CNN, Fox Business, and Bloomberg lined the back wall. The room smelled of expensive perfume and anticipation. Arthur Blackwood sat in the front row, looking 10 years older than he had a week ago. He stared blankly at the stage. Beside him, the empty seat reserved for Serafina felt like a gaping wound. He had been told she was indisposed, resting at a private clinic in Connecticut. He hadn't gone to see her. He couldn't face her. On stage, Grant Whitaker was in his element. He wore a $3,000 suit and a headset microphone. Behind him, a massive LED screen displayed the logo of Blackwood Law Summit. "Ladies and gentlemen," Grant's voice boomed, smooth and confident. For decades, the Brooklyn Navy Yard has been a relic of the past, a graveyard of industry. But today, we unveil the future, a future of steel, of glass, of dominance. He clicked a remote. The screen shifted to show his design, a towering, aggressive monolith of glass that looked like a jagged shard piercing the sky. It was impressive, cold, and utterly lifeless. "I give you the Blackwood Spire," Grant announced. Polite applause rippled through the room. It wasn't thunderous. The investors looked skeptical. The design was generic, a copy-paste of every other skyscraper in Dubai or Shanghai. "Wait," Grant smiled, raising a hand. "There's more. We have managed to cut construction costs by 30% by utilizing—" Click. The screen behind Grant flickered. The image of the glass tower distorted, pixelated, and then vanished. The room went dark for a second. Grant tapped his headset. "Audio? We have a glitch." Cut the feed. Suddenly a sound filled the room. It wasn't music. It wasn't a voice. It was the sound of a heartbeat. Thump, thump. Thump, thump. Amplified through the massive concert speakers, it was deep, resonant, and calming. Then came the sound of wind rustling through leaves. Then the gentle lap of water against a pier. The screen flared to life again. But it wasn't the Blackwood Spire. It was a video of the Navy Yard, but transformed. Green roofs cascaded down like waterfalls. The buildings curved like sound waves. An atrium of light and timber stood in the center. It was warm. It was inviting. It was human. Text appeared on the screen. Project Vox. The audience gasped. Phones were raised instantly. Grant turned around, horrified. "Cut it! Cut the damn feed!" he screamed at the tech booth. But the tech booth was locked. Inside, Jack Hawthorne had barricaded the door with a chair. He was sweating, his fingers flying across the mixing board, overriding Grant's controls. "Who is doing this?" Arthur Blackwood stood up, confusion warring with awe on his face. He recognized the design. He had seen glimpses of it under the sheet in the storage room. Then the stage lights shifted. A spotlight hit the far left of the stage. Serafina walked out. She didn't have a microphone. She stood in the center of the stage, the unauthorized projection playing behind her. She looked small against the massive screen, yet she commanded the room with a gravity that sucked the air out of the lungs of everyone present. Grant rushed toward her. "Get off the stage! Security, get her off!" Before Grant could touch her, Jack Hawthorne burst from the side curtain. He stepped between Grant and Serafina, shoving the vice president back with a force that sent Grant stumbling. "Don't touch her!" Jack snarled into his own lapel mic, which he had swiped from the tech booth. His voice echoed through the hall. The crowd went silent. This was unscripted drama, and the cameras zoomed in. Arthur Blackwood froze. "Serafina?" Serafina looked at her father. She didn't look at Grant. She looked at the audience. She raised her hands. Jack stood beside her, slightly behind, acting as her interpreter. He spoke into the microphone, his voice steady, but thick with emotion, translating her signs in real time. "My name is Serafina Blackwood," she signed, her movements large and graceful. "My name is Serafina Blackwood," Jack voiced. "For my entire life, people have spoken for me. They have told you I am broken. They have told you I am weak. They have told you I am silent. For my entire life, people have spoken for me," Jack translated, matching her cadence perfectly. "They told you I'm broken, weak, silent." Grant scrambled to the podium mic. "She's having an episode. Cut the feed. She's mentally unstable." "But silence is not emptiness," Serafina continued, ignoring him. "Silence is where we think. It is where we dream. The building you saw before, Mr. Whitaker's tower, is a monument to noise. It is a cage." "The building you saw before is a monument to noise. It is a cage," Jack's voice rang out. The screen behind them shifted again. It showed the schematics of Project Vox. This design is not a cage. It is a sanctuary. It is designed for the deaf, for the autistic, for the overwhelmed. It is a space that listens. "It is a space that listens," Jack said. Arthur was walking toward the stage now, mesmerized. He had never heard his daughter's thoughts. He had never known she had these thoughts. "I designed this," Serafina signed, striking her chest. "With the help of Jack Hawthorne. We built this. And Grant Whitaker stole it." "Grant Whitaker stole it," Jack translated, his voice hardening. Grant's face turned purple. "Lies! Slander! I'll sue you for everything!" Serafina signaled to Jack. Jack hit a key on the laptop he was holding. The beautiful architectural render vanished. In its place, a spreadsheet appeared on the massive 40-foot screen. It was the frame-up log. Then, a series of emails between Grant and Summit and company subject, Blackwood Data Sale, from g.whitaker@blackwood.com. Body: I have the structural data. Wire the $2 million to the Cayman account. I'll pin the leak on the new architect. The gasp from the audience was audible. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Flashbulbs erupted like a strobe light. Grant Whitaker froze. He looked at the screen, then at the audience. He saw his career, his reputation, and his freedom incinerate in seconds. That's faked," Grant stammered. But his voice was weak. Arthur Blackwood climbed the stairs onto the stage. He moved slowly, like a man waking up from a long coma. He looked at the screen. He read the emails. He saw the dates. He turned to Grant. The look on Arthur's face wasn't anger. It was something far more terrifying. It was absolute, cold clarity. "You framed him," Arthur said, his voice amplified by Jack's mic. "You stole from me, and you tried to destroy my daughter." "Arthur, listen. She's manipulating you," Grant started. Arthur didn't yell. He simply turned to the head of security, who was standing in the wings. "Escort Mr. Whitaker to a holding room, and call the NYPD. I want to press charges for corporate espionage and embezzlement." Two guards grabbed Grant by the arms. As they dragged him away, kicking and screaming obscenities, the cameras followed him. But Arthur didn't watch him go. He turned back to Serafina. The room was silent again. The three of them stood on stage, the father, the daughter, and the architect. Arthur looked at Serafina. His eyes filled with tears. He reached out a hand, trembling, and touched her cheek. He looked at Jack. "Tell her, Arthur whispered hoarsely. "Tell her I'm sorry." Jack lowered the microphone. He looked at Arthur. "Tell her yourself," Jack said gently. Arthur froze. He looked at his hands, the hands that had built an empire but had never learned to speak to his own child. He looked at Serafina, who was watching him with a mixture of hope and caution. Slowly, clumsily, Arthur Blackwood raised his hands. His fingers were stiff. He formed a fist, rubbed it in a circle over his chest. "Sorry," Arthur signed. It was sloppy. It was barely recognizable. But to Serafina, it was poetry. She let out a choked sob. She stepped forward and hugged her father. It was the first time they had hugged in 20 years. The audience, usually composed of cynical business moguls and hungry reporters, erupted. It started as a slow clap and built into a standing ovation. People were cheering. Jack stood back, watching the reunion. He felt a hand slip into his. He looked down. Molly had wandered onto the stage from the wings, unafraid of the lights. "Daddy, did we win?" she asked, loud enough for the mic to catch. Jack smiled, tears prickling his own eyes. He looked at Serafina, who was looking back at him over her father's shoulder, her eyes shining with gratitude and love. "Yeah, baby," Jack said. "We won." But just as the moment reached its peak, the reality of the situation crashed down. Police sirens wailed in the distance, not for Grant, but closing in on the hotel. A man in a sharp grey suit, Blackwood's chief legal counsel, stepped onto the stage and whispered in Arthur's ear. Arthur stiffened. He pulled away from Serafina and looked at Jack with a pained expression. "What is it?" Jack asked, sensing the shift. "The police are here," Arthur said, his voice grim. "Grant called them before he was taken away. He reported a violent break-in and cyber-terrorism by a disgruntled employee. Technically, you broke into the AV booth. You hacked the system. I exposed a criminal," Jack argued. "The law is the law," the lawyer said coldly. "Mr. Hawthorne, you need to come with us. If you resist, it will only be worse." Serafina saw the look on Jack's face. She saw the lawyer motioning to the police officers entering the back of the ballroom. Panic flared in her eyes. She grabbed Jack's arm. "No, you can't take him." Jack looked at her. He looked at Molly. He squeezed Serafina's hand one last time. "It's okay," Jack signed. "Take care of Molly." "Jack!" Serafina screamed, a guttural, unformed sound that tore through her throat, the first vocalization she had made in public since childhood. As the officers marched Jack away in handcuffs, flashing cameras capturing his arrest instead of his victory, Serafina stood center stage, trembling with rage. She had her voice back, but she had just lost her heart. The holding cell at the 19th precinct was cold, smelling of stale coffee and despair. Jack sat on the metal bench, his head in his hands. He had won the war, but lost his freedom. He worried about Molly. He worried that he had just destroyed his life for a moral victory. 3 hours later, the heavy steel door clanked open. Jack braced himself for a public defender. Instead, Arthur Blackwood walked in. The CEO looked tired, stripping off his expensive gloves. "Charges dropped," Arthur grunted to the officer, who immediately moved to uncuff Jack. "My legal team convinced the DA that your break-in was actually an authorized security test. A bit unorthodox, but effective." Jack rubbed his wrists, stunned. "And Grant? Grant is currently negotiating a plea deal for 15 years in federal prison," Arthur said, his voice hard. Then his expression softened. "You saved my company, Jack. But more importantly, you saved my relationship with my daughter." Arthur handed Jack a crisp envelope. "Project Vox breaks ground next month. You are the lead architect. Full creative control. Double the salary. And I've authorized the construction of a daycare center on the executive floor." Jack walked out into the precinct lobby, the envelope clutching in his hand like a lifeline. Serafina was waiting by the exit. She was still wearing the cheap black dress, holding a sleeping Molly in her arms. When she saw Jack, she didn't run. She just stood there, tears welling in her eyes, a beacon of calm in the chaotic station. Jack walked up to them, his heart hammering against his ribs. He gently took Molly from her arms, shifting the weight of his sleeping daughter to his hip. "I thought I lost you," Jack signed with his free hand. Serafina shook her head, a smile breaking through the tears. She reached out and placed her hand over his heart. "You signed hello when the world was silent," she signed back. "You are the only one who listened. I am never letting you go." 1 year later, the Blackwood Vox Center opened on the Brooklyn waterfront. It was an architectural marvel, a sanctuary of light, timber, and acoustic peace in the middle of a noisy city. But the guests at the opening ceremony didn't look at the building. They looked at the balcony. There, standing side by side, were Jack, Serafina, and Molly. They looked out over the city that had once ignored them. Jack looked at Serafina. "Ready?" She nodded. She looked at the crowd, then at her family. "Home," she signed. And for the first time in her life, the silence wasn't empty. It was full. And that is the story of how a single gesture of kindness brought down a corrupt empire and built a new legacy. Jack Hawthorne didn't need millions of dollars to change Serafina's life. He just needed to pay attention when no one else would. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the loudest thing you can do is listen. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a reminder that good people still exist. And if you want more stories about love, justice, and karma, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification so you never miss an upload. What would you have done if you were in Jack's shoes at that gala? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.